In part one of this video series, Sacred Stories, Frederick Buechner, author of such works as Godric and Brendan, revisits his childhood memories of his parents. Recounting a tragic event, Buechner reflects on its destructive impact on his life. By bringing the secrets of the past into the light, he discovers an opportunity to forgive, receive healing, and to reshape the future.
One November morning in the year 1936, when I was 10 years old, my father got up early, put on a pair of gray slacks and a maroon sweater, opened the door to look in briefly on my younger brother and me, who were playing a game in our room, and then went down into the garage where he turned on the engine of the family Chevy and sat down on the running board to wait for the exhaust to kill him, which it did. Except for a memorial for his Princeton class the next spring, by which time we had moved away to another part of the world altogether, there was no funeral, because on both my mother's and my father's side there was no church connection of any kind, and funerals were simply not part of the tradition. He was cremated, his ashes buried in a cemetery in Brooklyn, and I have no idea who, if anybody, was present. I know only that my mother, my brother, and I were not. There was no funeral to mark his death and put a period at the end of a sentence that had been his life. And as far as I can remember, once he had died, my mother and my brother and I rarely talked about him much ever again, either to each other or to anybody else. It made my mother too sad to talk about him, and since there was already more than enough sadness to go around, my brother and I avoided the subject with her, as she avoided it for her own reasons also with us. Once in a while she would bring it up, but only in very oblique ways. I remember her saying things like, "You're going to have to be big boys now," or "Now things are going to be different for all of us, and to me, you're the man of the family now," with that one little three-letter adverb, now, weighted with more grief and anger and guilt and God knows what all else than it could possibly bear. We didn't talk about my father with each other, and we didn't talk about him outside the family either, partly at least because suicide was looked on as something a little shabby and shameful in those days. Nice people weren't supposed to get involved with it. My father had tried to keep it a secret himself by leaving his note to my mother in a place where only she would be likely to find it, and by saying a number of times the last few weeks of his life that there was something wrong with the Chevy's exhaust system which he was going to see if he could fix. He did this partly in hopes that his life insurance wouldn't be invalidated, which of course it was, and partly too, I guess, in hopes that his friends wouldn't find out how he had died, which of course they did. His suicide was a secret we nonetheless tried to keep as best we could. And after a while, my father himself became such a secret. There was times when he seemed almost a secret we were trying to keep from each other. I suppose there were occasions when one of us said, "Remember the time he did this?" or "Remember the time he said that?" But if so, I've long since forgotten them. And because words are so much a part of what we keep the past alive by, if only words to ourselves, by not speaking of what we remembered about him, we soon simply stopped remembering itself, or at least I did. Within a couple of months of his death, we moved away from New Jersey, where he died, to the island of Bermuda, of all places, another house, another country. And from that point on, I can't even remember remembering him. Within a year of his death, I seem to have forgotten what he looked like, except for certain photographs of him, to have forgotten what his voice sounded like and what it had been like to be with him. Because none of the three of us ever talked about how we had felt about him when he was alive, or how we felt about him now that he was dead. Those feelings soon disappeared too and went underground, along with the memories. as nearly as I can find out from people who knew him. He was a charming, good-looking, gentle man who was down in his luck and drank too much and had a great number of people who loved him and felt sorry for him. Among those people, however inadequately they may have showed it, I can only suppose were his wife and 2 sons. But in almost no time at all, it was as if, at least for me, he had never existed. Don't talk. Don't trust. Don't feel. Is supposed to be the unwritten law of families that for one reason or another have gone out of whack. And certainly it was our law. We never talked about what had happened. We didn't trust the world with our secret, hardly even trusted each other with our secret. And as far as my 10-year-old self was concerned anyway, the only feeling I can remember from that distant time was the blessed relief of coming out of the dark and unmentionable sadness of my father's life and death into fragrance and greenness and light. Don't talk. Don't trust. Don't feel was the law we lived by, and woe to the one who broke it.
Remembering is an important part, I think, of spiritual growth, because if I'm right in this general thing I keep saying, that God speaks to us most eloquently, most powerfully, most irresistibly through what happens to us, and if we forget what's happened to us, we've forgotten the words that have been spoken to us from on high. I think that's the most important part of remembering.
I had happy times as a child before Bermuda, but the times I remember best from those earlier before Bermuda years are mostly somber ones. My father moving from job to job, and his drinking, which changed him from a gentle, conscientious man to a flamboyant, fragmented man, and my mother with her discontent and her terrible tongue, and worst of all, the appalling sound of their voices raised in anger as they fought about God only knows what, or to what dread and unimaginable end. Because we moved to a different town, a different house, a different school almost every year, those 2 people, my father and my mother, were the only fixed home I had. And I knew that if something awful happened between them or to them, the awful thing that would happen to me was that I would have no other place not only to go, but even to be. When my father wrote in his note to my mother, "I love and adore you, but am no good," I can only assume he believed that we would be better off without him. And in a tragic way, he was right. In that way, his death was, as I suspect he intended it to be, his last, best gift to us, and also about the only gift he had left by then to give.
You are your secrets. You are what's happened to you. You're especially those things that have happened to you at such a deep level and in such a sort of explosive way that you've kept them hidden all this time. And I think if you're ever to get out of, in a sense, the prison of your flesh to where you can meet other souls who are living in other fleshes, you've got to start revealing who you are.
22 years later, in a novel called The Return of Ansel Gibbs, long since forgotten, I told a very brief and fictionalized version of my father's death. And the most accurate word I can find to describe my mother's reaction to it is fury. For days, she could hardly bring herself to speak to me, and when she did, it was with words of great bitterness. As she saw it, I had betrayed a sacred trust. And though I might have defended myself by saying that the story was, after all, as much mine as his son to tell as it was hers as his widow to keep hidden, I not only didn't say any such thing, but never even considered such a thing. I felt as much of a traitor as she charged me with being. And at the age of 32, was as horrified at what I had done as if I'd been a child of 10. I was full of guilt and remorse, and sure that in who knows what grim and lasting way I would be made to suffer for what I had done.